Is Nora Calloway. I'm 29. 2 weeks ago, at my fiancé's family estate in Savannah, Georgia, his uncle stood up at the rehearsal dinner and raised a glass. Everyone expected a toast. What came out instead was this: "We're delighted that Thomas has found someone so ambitious." Though I do hope she understands that the Whitfield name carries expectations a background simply hasn't prepared her for. He said it with a smile, the kind of smile that makes cruelty look like a compliment. My fiancé Thomas squeezed my hand under the table. Then he let go. What none of them knew. Not Thomas's uncle, not his mother, not the 43 guests sitting in that candlelit dining room, was that I had been sitting on a folder for 6 months. A folder that held enough documentation to end everything his uncle had spent 30 years building. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. The rehearsal dinner was at Whitfield House, the family's antebellum estate outside Savannah. The kind of place that exists specifically to remind you of your place in the social order. Wrought iron gates. A live oak driveway that took 45 seconds to drive through. The catering alone cost more than my mother made in 3 months at her job managing a dry cleaning counter on Broughton Street. I grew up 4 miles from that estate. 4 miles might as well have been a different country. Thomas's uncle, Gerald Whitfield, sat at the head of the table. 61 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore a blazer to a barbecue and expected everyone to notice. He ran the Whitfield Family Foundation, a non-profit established by Thomas's late grandfather in 1971 to fund college scholarships for first-generation students in the coastal Georgia region. That foundation had paid for my college education. That detail will matter. Keep it. Gerald didn't stop at that one comment. He kept going, warming to it the way some people warm to an audience. "Nora, I believe you went to Georgia Southern. With our support." He said it like he was recounting a charity he'd long since forgotten. "We do love a success story. It's what the foundation is all about." The table laughed softly, politely. The way people laugh when they're not sure if something is funny or cruel, but they don't want to find out. I looked at Thomas. He was looking at his plate. I looked at Thomas's mother, Beverly. She was smiling at Gerald like he'd said exactly the right thing. I set down my fork. I folded my napkin. I placed it on the table beside my untouched salmon. "Mr. Whitfield," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "My mother has worked hard her entire life. I'm proud of where I come from. Thank you for the lovely dinner." I took off my engagement ring, set it next to the napkin, and I walked out, 31 steps to the front door. I counted because I needed something to count. My car was a 28 in Hyundai Elantra, parked at the end of the long driveway. The valet looked confused when I asked for it. Thomas had offered to lease me something newer. I'd said no. I was beginning to understand why. I drove home to my apartment in Midtown Savannah. 1 bedroom, $1,050 a month, mine. I made tea. Earl Grey. Too strong the way my mother made it when things were hard. And I sat at my kitchen table and opened a drawer I hadn't opened in 6 weeks. Inside was a manila folder. Grey tabs. My handwriting on the label. Whitfield Foundation. Documentation. 212 pages. I should tell you how this started. 14 months earlier, I'd received an email. February of last year, a Tuesday morning, 6:48 a.m. I was getting ready for work. I directed a non-profit called First Step Forward, a college access organization I joined as a program coordinator at 24 and worked my way up to executive director by 27. The email came from a blocked address. The subject line read, "Look closer at the Whitfield Foundation denial patterns, 28 in 2023. I read it 3 times. The Whitfield Foundation had given me a scholarship in 2013. Without it, I wouldn't have gone to college. My father had left when I was 11. My mother worked 2 jobs. There was no other option. That scholarship letter was the single most important piece of mail I had ever received. So sitting at my kitchen table in the early morning reading an anonymous tip suggesting fraud at the organization that had changed my life, the organization run by the family of the man I was falling in love with, was not a comfortable moment. I almost deleted it. Instead, I called my colleague Adrian, who ran the regional watchdog coalition we'd co-founded 4 years earlier. "I got a tip about a foundation I have a personal connection to," I said. "I need to recuse myself from any formal investigation. Can you still access the data? She asked. I could. As executive director of First Step Forward, I had working relationships with every college access nonprofit in the coastal Georgia region. I had access to public IRS filings through ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer. I could gather information without raising flags. I documented every step, every decision, every data pull. Because if I found something real, I'd need to be airtight. It took me 3 weeks to find the pattern. IRS Form 990 filings, 6 years, publicly available. The Whitfield Foundation reported an endowment of approximately $28 million. Annual scholarship distributions averaged $1.4 million, but the administrative costs had grown from 9% in 2018 to 27% by 2023. Where did the extra money go? Schedule O, consulting and advisory fees, 6 firms. Coastal Strategies Group, Heritage Planning Associates, Low Country Advisory LLC, Tidewater Consulting Partners, Georgia Education Consultants, Southern Legacy Group, all registered in Delaware, same registered agent, no websites, no employees I could find on LinkedIn. I traced them through my coalition's legal counsel and a formal fraud referral process. All 6 companies funneled payments to a single personal account at a regional bank. Account holder, Gerald R. Whitfield. But the money wasn't even the worst part. I cross-referenced scholarship denial data with application records obtained through public records requests to participating high schools. From 2018 to 2023, 134 qualified applicants had been denied. Average GPA, 3.9. Average SAT, 1,390. First-generation college students, 91%, 390. First-generation college students, 91%. Students of color, 84%. I interviewed 11 of them. A young man named Anthony had been denied in 2020. 4.1 GPA. Accepted to the University of Georgia. He deferred because he couldn't afford it without the scholarship. He was working construction now, 23 years old, talking to me in a parking lot during his lunch break. They said the foundation was prioritizing different demographics that year, he said. I didn't know what that meant. I figured I just wasn't good enough. He had been more than good enough. I sat in my car afterward for a long time. This wasn't just money stolen from a non-profit. These were lives redirected without consent, futures quietly rewritten by a man who showed up to galas and gave speeches about opportunity. I want to tell you about Thomas's grandmother, about Adeline Whitfield. Thomas's grandfather, Robert Whitfield, had founded the Scholarship Fund. He'd grown up poor in Savannah's Yamacraw neighborhood, become a self-made contractor, and build a modest fortune. The scholarship was his way of paying it forward. He died in 2004. Adeline ran the family's private investments after that, kept her distance from the foundation, and watched Gerald take it over. I met Adeline at a charity event in November 2 years ago. She was 83, sharp-eyed, in a wheelchair, wearing a name tag she'd written herself in block letters, Adeline W., RBUCT's wife. She'd recognized me from a panel I'd done on first-generation college success stories. You wrote about your mother in your scholarship essay, she said. I remember it. She worked nights so you could do homework with the lights on. I didn't know what to say. Thousands of scholars over decades, and she remembered that. We had coffee the following week. She told me she was dying. Congestive heart failure, 12 to 18 months. She told me she'd started asking questions about the foundation's finances and that Gerald had stopped returning her calls. I think something is wrong, she said. But I'm old, and I'm sick, and if I start making accusations, and I'm wrong, I'll destroy Robert's legacy. His name is on that building. What would you need to know for certain? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. I'd need someone I trusted who could find out without anyone knowing I was looking. That conversation was the beginning. Over the next 4 months, Adeline and I met 9 times. She gave me access to private board minutes she'd kept copies of as a founding family member. She gave me letters Robert had written about his intentions for the fund. She introduced me to the foundation's original attorney, a 70-year-old named Warren Chu, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the organization and was relieved to finally have someone to talk to. In March of last year, Adeline had a direct confrontation with Gerald. She wrote it down afterward. She described showing him a bank statement she'd obtained. She described him telling her, "You don't understand how non-profits work, Adeline. Modern organizations require strategic investment." She described him saying, "You're going to be gone soon. This is mine to manage now." She wrote it in a letter, had it notarized, had her cardiologist and a psychiatrist document her mental clarity, gave a copy to Warren and a copy to me. She died in September of last year, quietly, at home with her daughter beside her. I was not invited to the private service. I attended the public memorial at First Baptist Church, sat in the back row, and listened to Gerald give the eulogy. He talked about her generous spirit, her commitment to community, the Whitfield legacy. I had her letter in my bag. "I want to tell you about Thomas, because this story doesn't make sense without him, and because I need you to understand something. I loved him." That's not a footnote. It's the center of everything hard about what happened. We met at a 5K fundraiser for literacy 18 months ago. He'd shown up in regular athletic clothes, no family crest, no designer anything. He introduced himself as Tom. He asked what I did. When I explained First Step Forward, he asked questions that showed he'd actually listened. We ran the last mile together, exchanged numbers. I didn't know his last name for 2 months. When I found out, when we pulled up to Whitfield House for what he called a casual family dinner, and I realized whose driveway we were in, I froze. "Tom," I said. "What's your last name?" He looked confused. "Whitfield." I thought. "You knew, didn't you?" I didn't know. I know that seems impossible, but he'd never mentioned it. He drove a used Jeep he'd bought himself. He lived in a rented apartment in Ardsley Park. He worked as a structural engineer at a small firm doing affordable housing projects. He'd been careful, or maybe just natural, about keeping his distance from the family wealth. "Your family's foundation gave me a scholarship," I said. He went still. Then he said, "That's incredible. That's—" He stopped. "Are you okay?" I was not okay. I was in love with a man whose uncle I was secretly investigating for embezzlement. I kept the investigation completely separate. I recused myself from every formal step. I documented everything. I kept 2 different notebooks. One for work, one for what I was slowly uncovering. I never mixed them. I tried to tell Thomas 11 times, 11 moments where I almost said it. Sitting on the porch of his apartment, driving back from his parents' house after a dinner where Gerald had made one of his little comments about my scrappy background. Walking on the beach at Tybee Island where Thomas had first said he loved me. But I couldn't say it, because once I said it, everything would crack open, and I needed to know something first. I needed to know what kind of man he was when it counted. Thomas proposed in January of this year. Battery Park, down by the river. Simple. Private. The ring had belonged to Adeline. He'd asked his mother for it weeks earlier, not knowing I'd known Adeline, not knowing what that ring meant to me in that moment. I said yes, because I loved him, because I didn't yet know what he would do when things got hard. The engagement changed things with Gerald. He called a lunch meeting, just the 2 of us, in April. He chose a place called the Old Pink House, $50 entrees, wood paneling, the kind of restaurant where Savannah's old guard goes to feel historic. He didn't waste any warmth on preamble. "I'll be straightforward," he said. "The foundation is an important institution. Our family's reputation is tied to it. I've heard you do advocacy work in this space, which is admirable. But I need to know that you understand the difference between advocacy work and family loyalty." "I'm not sure I follow," I said. He smiled. "I think you do. Nora, I'm going to offer you $150,000. A gift. Think of it as a head start for your future. In exchange, you step back from the engagement quietly. You move on. Thomas is young, he'll grieve and recover. I let the number sit in the air between us. I don't need your money, I said, and I'm not leaving Thomas." His smile disappeared. "Then I hope you understand that there are ways this can become very uncomfortable for you." I stood up, put on my coat. "See you at the rehearsal dinner, Mr. Whitfield." He heard it as a social nicety. It wasn't. The night of the rehearsal dinner, after I drove home, after I set the ring on the counter and made my tea and opened that drawer, my phone rang. It was Thomas's cousin, a 26-year-old named Bridget, who had been sitting 3 seats down from me when Gerald made his toast. Bridget was the only member of the Whitfield family who had never made me feel like a variable to be managed. Nora. Her voice was tight. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I started to stand up and my mother put her hand on my arm. I know, I said. I saw. There's something you need to know. After you left, Gerald called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. He's going to move to I don't know the legal language. Warren called me. He said Gerald is trying to file some kind of petition, claiming you improperly cultivated a relationship with Adeline to influence her estate plans. I almost laughed. Bridget, I said. What time did Adeline pass away? Confused pause. September 14th. Why? Adeline gave me board documentation and notarized statements starting in February of last year, 7 months before she died. Warren witnessed all of it. Gerald can't claim undue influence on a decision that was made when she was fully competent and alive. Silence. Nora, what are you going to do? I looked at the folder on my table. At the photo of Adeline I'd kept on my desk since the memorial. At 212 pages of documentation I'd been sitting on since October. I'm going to finish what she asked me to finish. I sent the email at 12:47 a.m. Subject: Notice of Emergency Board Meeting, Whitfield Family Foundation, Fiduciary Breach and Financial Irregularities. Body: Pursuant to Whitfield Foundation Bylaws. Article 5, Section 2. I am calling an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors to address matters of financial mismanagement and fiduciary breach. Meeting: March 19th, 10,000 Tentars. Aboard 204 West Jones Street, Savannah, GAO. Attends required per Article 5, Section 4. Evidence documentation attached. I CC'd all 8 board members. Warren Chu, IRS Special Agent Linda Ferraro, who I'd contacted 3 months earlier through my coalition's legal counsel. Georgia Attorney General Charitable Trust Division. Contact Attorney Brian Holloway. The Savannah Morning News. Reporter Keisha Drummond, who covered non-profits and education. Attachment: 29.4 megabytes. 212 pages. I hit send at 12:47 a.m. and listened to my apartment settle around me in the dark. Gerald tried to fight back fast. 9 a.m. the following morning, he convened his own board meeting. 3 board members showed up, his loyalists. Warren attended but did not represent Gerald. He represented Adeline's estate, Mr. Morrill. Whitfield, Warren said. Adeline's appointment of Nora Calloway to the board was executed 14 months before her death, witnessed by 2 medical professionals, and is legally unassailable. Your petition has no standing. Gerald's attorney filed for temporary restraining order 2 days later, trying to block my meeting on grounds of conflict of interest and defamation. The hearing was March 16th, Chatham County Superior Court. IRS Special Agent Ferraro stood up at that hearing. Your Honor, the federal government opposes this restraining order. Miss Calloway's meeting involves evidence directly relevant to an active IRS investigation into the Whitfield Foundation. Locking this proceeding would constitute obstruction. Motion should be denied. It was denied in 22 minutes. In the days between the court hearing and the board meeting, something happened that I hadn't expected. Thomas called. He asked if we could meet. I said yes because I needed to hear what he would say. We met at a coffee shop on Drayton Street. He looked like he hadn't slept. He was wearing a wrinkled flannel shirt. No watch, no family blazer, nothing to signal what he came from. I don't know everything you found, he said. I don't know what's in that folder, but I know my uncle, and I think whatever you found is real. He paused. I should have stood up at that dinner. When he made that comment, I should have stood up immediately and made him apologize. Instead, I let go of your hand, and I've been sick about it since. Why didn't you? I asked, not unkindly. I genuinely wanted to know. He was quiet for a moment. Because I've spent my whole life learning that family loyalty means staying quiet, even when staying quiet is the wrong thing. He looked at me. I don't want to be that person anymore. I didn't make him any promises. But I didn't walk away either. Thomas's father, Richard, Gerald's younger brother, had been largely silent through all of this. He called me 2 days before the board meeting. We met at a park bench near Forsyth's fountain. Richard looked 10 years older than he had at Christmas. He sat with his hands clasped, looking at the fountain. I've known something was off for 4 years, he said. I raised concerns at a board meeting in 2020. Gerald told me I didn't understand non-profit finance and I let it go. I was a coward. He cleared his throat. My father started that foundation because he believed in it. I've spent 4 years looking the other way while Gerald stripped it for parts. He paused. If you need my testimony, you have it. Why now? I asked. Because the way Gerald talked about your mother at that dinner, the way he said it, he shook his head. My father would have been ashamed. Board member Constance Adiemi called me the morning of March 18th, the day before the meeting. She was 68, a retired high school principal from Brunswick who had joined the foundation board because she believed in the scholarship mission. Adeline called me before she died, she said. She told me she'd found someone to finish what she couldn't. I believed her then. I believe you now. I'll vote with you. March 19th, 10,000 am. I arrived at the first step forward office at 7:30. I needed time. 8 chairs, 8 evidence packets, water pitchers, pens. The conference room walls held photographs of scholarship recipients going back 11 years. Dozens of faces. I'd added 12 photos in the corner. Students who had been denied. Anthony was in that row. He'd sent me a photo when I asked. He looked serious and young and like exactly what he was. Someone whose future had been quietly redirected by a man he'd never met. I wore a navy blazer I'd bought at a consignment shop on Bull Street 4 years ago. My mother's pearl earrings, flat shoes. I wanted to look like exactly what I was. I didn't need to look like anything else. Gerald arrived at 10,004. He was 4 minutes late on purpose. He walked in expecting to manage the situation. Instead, he found 8 people, a federal badge, a state attorney's office representative, Warren Chew with a briefcase, and me at the head of the table with a stack of manila folders in front of each chair. He looked at me, then at Warren, then at Agent Ferraro. What is this? A properly noticed board meeting, Warren said. You received the email 11 days ago. Gerald sat. He sat like a man planning to leave. I opened the meeting. My voice was steady. The room was quiet. From 2018 to 2023, the Whitfield Foundation denied scholarships to 134 qualified applicants, 84% of whom were students of color. During that same period, $2.3 million was transferred from the foundation to 6 consulting companies with no documented deliverables, all of which traced to a single personal account. I projected the bank statements. Gerald's name on the account. 6 years of deposits. Exhibit A. First Citizens Bank statements. Transfers from Coastal Strategies Group. Heritage Planning Associates. Low Country Advisory LLC. Tidewater Consulting Partners. Georgia Education Consultants. And Southern Legacy Group. Combined total $2.3 million. All 6 entities share a registered agent in Delaware. None have verifiable employees, websites, or deliverables. Constance made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp. Exhibit B. Shell Company Registrations. All 6 incorporated within a 4-month window in 2018. Same agent, same structure. This is speculation, Gerald said. His voice was tight but controlled. We engaged legitimate consultants for strategic planning. May I see the work product? I asked. That's proprietary. I subpoenaed for it, Agent Ferraro said. There is none. I move forward. Exhibit C. Scholarship denial records, cross-referenced with application data obtained through public records requests. 134 applicants. Average GPA 3.9. First generation 91%. The foundation had the resources to fund all of them. The money existed. It went elsewhere. Constance was crying. Quietly. She didn't look away. Exhibit D. Internal communications, subpoenaed from Foundation servers. October 2019 email from GDAC. Whitfield to Foundation staff. Our scholarship profiles should reflect the kind of families our major donors can relate to. Let's be thoughtful about fit going forward. I let that sentence sit in the room. Fit, I said. That is what happened to 134 students. Gerald's attorney leaned in and whispered something. Gerald shook his head. In the months before her death, Adeline Whitfield documented her concerns about foundation finances in a series of notarized letters. 6 letters, witnessed by Warren Shue and her cardiologist. I will read one now. I put Adeline's 3rd letter on the projector screen. Her handwriting was neat and old-fashioned, blue ink on cream paper. The notary stamp was visible on the side. I read it aloud. She described confronting Gerald with bank records. She described him telling her she was confused, that she didn't understand modern fund management. She described him saying, "You're not going to be around long enough for it to matter, Adeline. This foundation is going to outlive you whether you approve of how I run it or not." The room was completely silent. Richard, Thomas's father, put his hand over his mouth. He stared at the screen. I closed the folder. Adeline Whitfield loved what her husband built. She was too ill to fight alone and too careful to destroy it through public accusation without evidence. She asked me to gather that evidence. Today I'm honoring that request. Gerald stood up. I moved to adjourn. Motion requires a second, I said. Do I hear one? Silence. Motion fails. We continue. Gerald's attorney touched his arm. Gerald sat back down. Agent Ferraro stood. For the record, IRS has confirmed these transfers constitute self-dealing under Internal Revenue Code Section 4941. Criminal referral is pending. Georgia AG's Charitable Trust Division is opening a parallel investigation. I made the motion. I move that this board suspend Gerald Whitfield from Oil Foundation duties immediately. Authorize an independent forensic audit. Cooperate fully with federal and state investigations and review all denied applications from 2018 to 2023 with the intent of retroactively awarding scholarships where possible. Constance's hand went up immediately. Warren's, Richard's, he wasn't a board member, but he was present and he raised it anyway, and in that moment I didn't correct him. 4 other board members followed. 6 hands. Gerald raised his. His 2 loyalists followed. 3 opposed. Motion passes 6-3. Mr. Whitfield, you are suspended pending investigation. Please surrender foundation credentials, credit cards, and system access to Warren before you leave. Gerald stood. He picked up his blazer from the back of the chair. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned around. He looked at me the way people look at things they can't believe have beaten them. He didn't say anything. He walked out. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs was the best sound I had heard in a long time. Keisha Drummond from the Savannah Morning News had been in the back of the room. She published online at 5:30 that afternoon. By the next morning, the Associated Press had picked it up. My evening, it was on the Georgia Public Broadcasting News Hour. Gerald's attorney released a statement the following week. Mr. Whitfield maintains that all financial activities were within proper bounds. Any irregularities were accounting errors and will be addressed through internal review. The IRS announced a formal criminal investigation 4 days later. In November, Gerald was indicted on 7 counts: wire fraud, tax evasion, filing false IRS returns. The arrest happened at a Tuesday morning at his home on Skidaway Island. A news photographer was there. He was released on $300,000 bail. He looked like a man who finally understood that consequences existed. Thomas disappeared from my life for a while after the board meeting. Not completely. I knew from Richard that he was in therapy, that he'd left his firm to do independent contracting, that he was spending weekends volunteering with a Habitat build in Liberty County. Bridget told me he'd stopped going to family dinners at Whitfield House entirely. I didn't reach out. I had work to do. The foundation board spent the following 3 months reviewing all 134 denied applications. We sent letters. We offered scholarships retroactively where possible. We created a re-entry fund for students who had already found other paths but wanted financial support for vocational training, certifications, community college. Anthony was one of the first to respond. He enrolled in a construction management program at Savannah Technical College that January. He emailed me 2 sentences. I thought I missed my window. Thank you for reopening it. I printed that email. It's on my wall. Richard stepped in as interim foundation president. He donated $2.8 million from personal funds, a combination of inheritance and assets, to restore what had been taken and add 3 years of funding for expanded scholarships. His statement was brief. My father built this to help people. I spent years looking away while it was hollowed out. This is the beginning of making that right. Gerald's trial was 8 months later. Federal Court, Savannah Division. His defense was incompetence. Claimed he didn't understand that the consulting arrangements were improper, blamed a former CFO, said he'd relied on bad advice. The prosecution had better receipts, bank records, the shell company filings, my testimony, Richard's testimony. 3 of the denied students gave impact statements. Anthony spoke for 6 minutes. He talked about working construction while watching his classmates get degrees. The jury deliberated 9 hours. Guilty on 5 of 7 counts. Sentencing was 4 months later. 63 months federal prison. Restitution of $2.3 million. 3 years supervised release. The judge said, "You were entrusted with resources meant for the most vulnerable, and you treated those resources as personal income. The measure of your crime is not in the dollar amount. It is in the futures that were quietly closed." Thomas was in the courtroom. He sat with his father, not with his mother. When the verdict was read, he didn't move. When the marshals led Gerald out, Thomas looked at his hands. I was at the back of the room. We made eye contact on the way out. He nodded. I nodded back. 4 months later, he sent a letter to my office. Handwritten. 1 page. "Nora, I know I have no right to ask for time. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to say what I should have said at that rehearsal dinner. I'll be at Clary's Cafe on Abercorn Street next Saturday at 11. I'll wait for an hour. If you come, I'll be grateful. If you don't, I understand completely. Thomas." I didn't answer right away. I thought about Adeline, about what she'd said to me when I asked her why she'd chosen me. "Because you know what it costs, and you did it anyway. That's the only kind of brave that matters." I thought about my mother, about those pearl earrings she'd passed down, about the scholarship letter she'd held in her cleaning collused hands and cried over in our kitchen in 2013. I thought about Anthony going back to school. I walked into Clary's on a Saturday morning. Thomas was already there, black coffee, early. He stood up when he saw me. We sat down. He looked different. Smaller, somehow, in a good way. Less armored. "Thank you for coming," he said. I almost didn't. I know. He took a breath. "I sat down when I should have stood up. I've spent the last year trying to understand why, and here's what I figured out. I was taught that protecting the family meant staying quiet. I called it loyalty. It was cowardice." He met my eyes. "You showed me what actual courage looks like. I'm still learning it. I don't know if that's enough for you. I'm not asking you to decide today. I'm just asking you to know that I'm different now." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Abercorn Street was doing its quiet Saturday morning thing. Tourists. Dog walkers. The particular gold of Georgia light in spring. "I don't know if I can trust you the way I did," I said. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for that. Not yet." I looked at him. At the flannel shirt and the tired eyes and the person I'd fallen in love with at a 5K a year and a half ago when I didn't know his last name. "Let's start with coffee," I said. "Just Saturdays. We'll talk. We'll see." He nodded. Relief and fear and something careful all at once. "I can do that," he said. The foundation expansion was announced in April. New scholarship chapters in Brunswick, Augusta, and Macon. Funded by the restored endowment, plus a wave of donations that had come in after the story broke. People who had seen the coverage and wanted to be part of rebuilding something that had been taken apart. 60 new scholarships per year. Adeline's name on the award. I gave a brief statement at the press announcement. Robert Whitfield built this foundation because he believed education changes lives. It does. We've seen it. We'll keep seeing it. Thomas was in the back row. He left before the reception. But he'd been there. 6 weeks later, sitting at a small table at Clary's on a Saturday morning, coffee number 7, Thomas said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." If I proved, over real time, not promises, that I'm the person I'm trying to become, would there be a chance? I thought about everything it had cost to get to this table. About Adeline's letter in my wallet, the same one I carried every day. About Anthony's email on my wall. I don't need you to be perfect, I said. I need you to be the kind of person who stands up, even when it costs something. Can you promise me that? He looked at me steadily. Yes. Then keep showing up on Saturdays, I said, and we'll see where it goes. We're still on Saturdays, still coffee, still careful, still building something, or maybe rebuilding it. I'm not sure there's a difference. My mother came to the foundation spring gala last month. She wore a blue dress she'd bought at Belk's and her own pearl earrings. She stood in front of the wall of scholarship recipients for a long time. Your name is up there, she said. From 2013. I know. She reached over and took my hand. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. Adeline knew what she was doing when she chose me. Not because I was the bravest person she could find, but because I knew what it felt like to need that letter. To open it at the kitchen table with your mother standing over your shoulder. Both of you understanding that it was the door, and you'd almost missed it. I know what's behind that door. That's why I'll keep standing in front of it. I've thought a lot about the moment Thomas let go of my hand. Not Gerald's toast. Not the humiliation in front of 43 people who watched my future mother-in-law smile, while her brother-in-law talked about my mother like she was a footnote. That part hurt, but it wasn't the part that stayed with me. What stayed was the feeling of Thomas's fingers releasing mine under that table. That small, quiet withdrawal. That choice. I used to wonder if I'd been too hard on him for it. He wasn't the one who spoke. He didn't plan it. He wasn't Gerald. But here's what I came to understand. Slowly, over a very long year, the people who stay silent while wrong things happen are not innocent bystanders. They are a necessary ingredient. Gerald couldn't have operated the way he did for 5 years without a room full of people who found it more comfortable to look at their plates. Thomas looked at his plate. Richard looked away for 4 years. Beverly smiled. And 134 kids got letters telling them they didn't fit the profile. That's how it works. That's always how it works. The cruelty at the top only survives because of the quiet underneath it. What I keep coming back to is Adeline. She knew what Gerald was doing, and she was too ill, too tired, too afraid of destroying what Robert had built to fight it openly. She made a different choice. She found someone else and handed them the tools. Some people would call that cowardice. I don't. I think she was being honest about her limits and brave enough to work within them. She couldn't run, but she could pass the baton. That takes a different kind of courage than charging forward. It takes the wisdom to know what you can carry, and the integrity to make sure the work doesn't die with you. I think about that when people ask me how I managed to keep going. Managing the investigation, planning a wedding, watching the man I loved not stand up, waiting to see who he really was. The honest answer is that I wasn't carrying it alone. Adeline had given me something heavier than a folder of documents. She'd given me a reason that was bigger than my own situation. When things felt unbearable, I thought about Anthony working construction. I thought about the 11 people I'd interviewed who had quietly adjusted their lives around a door that had been closed without their knowledge. My pain was real. Theirs was also real. And theirs had a number, 134. There's something that happens when you attach your effort to something larger than your own outcome. The work becomes possible in a way it wasn't before. Not easy. Nothing about this was easy. But possible. What Gerald never understood, what people like him almost never understand, is that the resources they exploit aren't just money, they're trust. Robert Whitfield built that foundation on the belief that a community would steward it honestly. When Gerald took that money, he wasn't just stealing dollars, he was spending down something that had taken decades to build and couldn't be replaced by a restitution check. The financial damage had a number. The trust damage didn't. That's the part that takes the longest to repair. Thomas is still repairing it. Saturday by Saturday, hour by hour, at a Habitat build site, sitting in a therapist's office twice a week working through what it means to have been raised to protect a name instead of a principle. I don't know yet where we land, but I know the difference between a person who is trying and a person who is performing trying. He is trying. That matters. My mother came to the gala. She stood in front of the scholarship wall in her blue Belk's dress and her pearl earrings, and she found my name from 2013 and she took my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I know what that scholarship letter meant when it arrived at our kitchen table. I know what it cost her to work those nights so I could study with the lights on. I know that Adeline remembered my essay because it was about hands, my father's mechanic hands, my mother's dry cleaning hands, and she understood that those hands were the real foundation, not the estate on Skidaway, not the family crest, hands that showed up and kept going. That's the only inheritance worth anything. Everything else is just furniture.